what's going on then with the two of you guys then?
We invented, I'd say, some of the earliest ideas pre-ChatGPT of this whole idea of talking to a character, which at the time was pretty new, now is pretty normal.
And what immediately caught my eye was like, not only was it very high quality in terms of the output, it was 20x cheaper than whatever was considered top of the market at the time.
There's a lot of really great lessons that were learned from like 2014 to 2020 maybe, when Alexa and Google Assistant were becoming really prominent and stuff like that.
We've hit the cost, we've hit the quality, now we need to give the control. That's, I think, where it's really going. And that also makes it accessible to a lot of different use cases.
We recognize that conversational applications are the natural evolution of human-computer interaction.
And this is actually one of the things that we've been focused on is how can you serve, for example, 100 variants for 100 different user segments and make sure that each of them is slightly different and improved.
Just look at the quality of the voices that we've just played just then. They're absolutely amazing. When you look back and you go back and you rewind to 2017 and you listen to Alexa and Google Assistant, they're absolutely phenomenal. This episode of VUX World is with Andrei Papancea, who is the CEO of NLX, and Kylan Gibbs, the CEO of InWorld. And it is a conversation about how these two companies have come together to create the possibility and the reality of amazing, immersive, human-like voice experiences. Voice AI is having an absolute revelation right now. Large language models have brought about the ability to understand pretty much everything, which old voice assistants and chatbots couldn't do. And now the voice capabilities, the synthetic voices, the text-to-speech voices that are available now through the likes of InWorld are absolutely staggering. They are amazing compared to what we had in 2017, 2018. And so those two things combining together, high levels of understanding plus high levels of human-like fidelity on the voice channel, make for incredible experiences. This conversation is a combination of what's possible today and why and how these technologies have come to be so good today and how you can leverage them in your business to create really great high level and high satisfaction experiences. Why, in fact, investing in the voice AI component is better for customer satisfaction. There's some research we talk about that points to the fact that it is the case. But also we look at where's it going, and what's not just where's it going as in like some future facing mad reality, but like where is it actually going based on where it is today. We talk about hyper personalization at a demographic level. For example, if you're an older person, you might want it to speak a bit slower. If you're a younger person, perhaps you might want it to behave slightly differently. But also at an individual level, customized, personalized voice experiences based on your individual personality and preference. It's essentially, that's what path we're on, and we plot a path to realize that during this conversation. This conversation is interesting for anyone who's been on the fence about voice AI or who's just generally interested in where it is now, because you might be debating implementing it in your business. It's featuring Andrei from NLX. You'll know NLX by now if you've been listening to VUX World over the course of this year. Andrei gets his hat trick on this podcast. NLX, for those that don't know, is an enterprise conversational AI platform that allows you to build all kinds of AI automation experiences across all kinds of verticals, retail, insurance, travel, you name it, across all kinds of channels, chat, messaging, voice, again, you name it. It's got incredible technologies and Voice Plus, its Voice Plus capabilities, patented technology, which is essentially where the interaction starts on the phone and you'll receive like a text message or what have you, and you'll complete the interaction digitally, but the voice AI agent will stay on the phone with you, guiding you through the whole process. Incredibly useful, a lot lighter lift than end-to-end voice automation, but you still get the great interaction, the great voice AI interactions that go alongside it. And so definitely go and check out NLX if you are interested in your conversational automation initiatives, and strap in, because this conversation is absolutely immense. Without further ado, here's Kylan Gibbs and Andrei Papancea on VUX World. All right, Andrei, Kylan, welcome to VUX World.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, excited to be here. Thanks, James.
Likewise, excited to have you. Welcome back, Andrei.
Good to see you, Kane.
I think I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, that this is your third episode.
I think so. At least this year.
At least this year, exactly. But definitely, I'm pretty sure this is at least the third episode, and therefore, you are part of the Hat Trick Club on VUX World, and therefore you earn yourself a gold VUX World cap. How does that sound?
Hell yes. I will look forward to receiving it. I was secretly hoping it's like an SNL like jacket, but I will.
It's like the like when you win the Masters and you get the gold jacket or the green jacket or whatever. It's the equivalent of podcasts.
That's fantastic.
Wow.
I wish I knew in advance, even better.
Exactly. So that will be working its way to you. Maybe I should have organised that before this episode, but anyway, it will be with you before long. So welcome back, and thanks for joining us as well, Kylan. Really appreciate your time. Curious to hear a little bit about what you guys have cooking, basically, because it sounds very exciting. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of voice AI, hence the VUX in the name, and curious to learn a little bit about what's going on. So why don't we start, Andrei? Obviously the VUX audience knows, highly likely knows who you are, but maybe for some context we should start with some intros, and we'll do a little bit of an intro to you, Andrei, and you, Kylan, as well.
Sounds fantastic. Well, for those of you who are returning, hello. For those of you who don't know, NLX is a company specializing in conversational applications. Simply put, we help anyone through the use of our platform to build any form of conversational application, be it text, voice-based, or our patented and highly interactive Voice Plus technology.
Wicked. And we did do a great webinar on Voice Plus, and so we'll pop the link to that down here in the show notes. If people want to go and find out more about that, I would certainly encourage you to go and view that, because it was incredibly interesting. Kylan, tell us a bit about yourself.
Fantastic. Thank you. So Kylan, I'm CEO at InWorld. So we've been around now for around 4 years. We invented, I'd say, some of the earliest ideas, pre-ChatGPT, of this whole idea of talking to a character. Which at the time was pretty new. Now is pretty dang normal, given how much time people spend on ChatGPT. And now, what we do is we provide the runtime to actually scale multimodal AI pipelines. So, for example, you imagine your simple scenario of just a speech-to-speech pipeline. It's actually very hard to build all the models that you need to build that. Of course, it's very hard to build the pipeline and make it work efficiently. So we provide all the tools to do that. And then we work with amazing people like NLX to actually be able to put those in front of customers. We are very much a developer-facing company, but we love our users and love working with people who love their users.
Wicked. And correct me if I'm wrong, it's the ex-founder of Dialogflow, is that correct?
That's right, yeah. So my co-founder, Ilya, actually most of our team comes from that. So a little bit of background there is I was at DeepMind. My job at DeepMind was to take DeepMind models and integrate them to Google products. A lot of that ended up working through Google Cloud, which was a Dialogflow is a product of. And the team from API.ai, which got acquired by Google, became Dialogflow, was all working there. And we actually all kind of ended up connecting there and basically had the idea for InWorld saying, well, actually, the generative models are doing a lot more than we could do before with the Dialogflow generation. And so we basically set out to create the new platform based on Gen AI at the time. But yeah, so Ilya, Mike,
Wow.
And a lot of our engineering team actually comes from that. So there's strong roots in the Dialogflow base, yeah.
Nice. Interesting. Small world, isn't it? That's really interesting. That sounds great. So what's going on then with the two of you guys then? I mean, obviously, we can see, looking at InWorld, you do a lot of things. I think TTS and voice is a very kind of big part of that. So maybe, Andrei, maybe there's a bit of context behind what interested NLX about InWorld, and we can maybe get into a little bit about what you guys are cooking up.
Well, for one, we first met each other a couple of years back. It must have been 2023, where we both went through the generative AI cohort of Comcast's Lift Labs. Really cool, let's say, accelerator program, like well aligned with business needs and whatnot. So anyone bumping into that or having a company, really check it out. It's awesome. And obviously kept in touch. And then I remember Kylan posted there, it must have been just like a few short months ago, their text-to-speech offering. And I think that's kind of when you started releasing some of these primitives that you've noticed obviously have high demand. And what immediately caught my eye was like, not only was it very high quality in terms of the output, it was 20x cheaper than whatever was considered top of the market at the time. Won't name drop, it's okay. And basically I was like, can we please talk? Because you know this, Kane, but just for the sake of the audience, like we at NLX, we don't build the core AI primitives. So we don't build text-to-speech, speech-to-text, don't build obviously LLMs, NLP, etc. And we like to meet our customers where they want to be. And obviously we do a lot of voice, and it's, yeah, the moment I saw that post, I was like, this is fantastic. And, reconnected with Kylan and team.
Nice.
Oh, you're making my heart warm, Andrei.
It's very objective. So basically,
yeah. As long as I'm making your wallet happy, that's what matters.
And so what led you then, Kylan, to create? And I'm presuming that the kind of text to speech stuff and the voice AI infrastructure, all of that is like proprietary stuff that you've built.
Yes,
is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
And what led you to do that then?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of a history here, which is when we first started out, we were very much land and expand, but we started with basically characters for games, right? And that was where we really started 4 years ago. And primarily at that time, we a lot of the work was how do we kind of abstract away all the challenges of creating prompts, creating these different aspects, connecting these parts of characters so that people could just basically, non-technical people could prompt it into existence. And the reality is over the preceding 4 years, people tended to learn a lot more about AI, how to work with it, what the heck prompts were, how to work with LLMs. And so generally what happened is we just kind of saw people wanting like deeper and deeper level access. They didn't want to just kind of interact with it via prompts or text. They wanted to actually see the code. They wanted to see the primitives and everything else. We had all of that in the back end, but it was just kind of hidden behind a black box. And so over time, basically we started to find that people were building pretty similar pipelines. Some version of a speech to text to an LLM to text to speech. Maybe you've got knowledge in there. Maybe you've got some other aspects in there. And so what we decided to do was just get really good at building those kind of canonical pipelines. But there's a kind of an aspect of connecting together, certain other voice providers, OpenAI, your Whisper with speech to text. But then you start to realize you can start to make a lot of improvements just making those connections, which is what we did in building our runtime, which is how you actually build the pipelines themselves. But when we get into the components, what we tended to find was there were specific components that were just always a bottleneck for customers. So kind of as Andrei was saying with text to speech, the bottleneck was almost always on cost. Like people were like, I like the quality, it's super cool, but like if I put this in front of 1 million users, I'm going to be like genuinely bankrupt. And so we just set out basically by saying, we're going to say we know the price that customers want to pay. And we're going to, from our own perspective, just really do whatever we can to get the best possible quality at that price point. And so we basically invested in an engineering team and a research team to do that. And we happen to be kind of hit it out of the water. And so now we have it $5 per million characters, which is, genuinely very good. And the quality is actually now I think it's topping most of the other models on the arena. So it worked out pretty well. But our general approach is kind of the Amazon marketplace approach, which is to say we allow the integration of any providers. We're provider agnostic. But when we see an opportunity where customers are struggling with a specific component, we'll lean in and build that. And we tend to have a very strong strength in the speech and audio space. So what you'd expect into the future is maybe other things like turn taking, speaker recognition, and those different aspects that improve those speech-to-speech pipelines.
Interesting. So am I right in thinking then that as well as the text to speech, you also have like, because you mentioned there like orchestrating between LLMs and stuff like that, like where does that stuff come into it?
Yes, good question. So imagine that you had an application today and you've already built it. So our general target customer is not the 0 to 1. We're targeting basically those who are scaling. It's pretty easy to build applications today, like Cursor, Lovable, Claude Code, all these things have made it really easy. Where you run into the challenges in most cases is, okay, you've got a 5-person team, all of a sudden you've got 2 million concurrent users. Your tech stack basically breaks then. So that's really like where we're focused on, just kind of to set the frame. And so in those cases, what we often find is a customer will come and say, okay, great, I want to swap out my text to speech model. And so we're going to help them evaluate and set up their text to speech, make sure all the features are there. But then at some point, you're like, well, you can't build a pipeline with a text to speach model alone. You got to have the other parts in there. You got to have the LLM before that. You've got to have the speech to text. You've got to be able to have your knowledge base, probably some safety filters, maybe some intent recognition, for example. And so it ends up being a pipeline of some kind or a graph of some kind. And so what we did is we built actually out the runtime, which is what we call it, which is basically the actual, like the system that runs that pipeline and does that efficiently. And so it basically provides all the components that you need. And then it basically allows it to be all compiled into a C++ based graph so that those components are not only stitched together, but they're optimized to hell. And so what you end up getting out of that is, the best performing multimodal pipeline that you possibly can, but you get to control all the knobs in it and build it as a graph.
Right. Interesting. So what does InWorld fill in terms of NLX then, Andrei? Because I'm assuming you've got bits in there like knowledge bases and LLM orchestration and something like. Where do the twain shall meet, so to speak?
Well, there's obviously one. It started off with the text-to-speech component, but then if you think about our, NLX is like being just infrastructure agnostic. We also don't build a voice channel. We don't build a lot of these. We sit at the application layer. So in the world where providing like ultra low, latency voice experiences, and even over chat, like providing a good snappy experience is good, irrespective of whether it's voice or chat. It's just in voice are noticeable. So we're looking to leverage these capabilities to further streamline some of these channels, right, and make them more performant. While NLX, deals with like the next best action standpoint, like our let's say our own runtime, and let's call it the conversation engine for lack of a better description, the NLU, is exposed through multiple protocols: REST, WebSocket, WebRTC, SIP. I'm pretty sure there's like another one or two, but MCP as well. But one of the key ones for the purposes of this conversation, we also have an OpenAI compliant interface, which means all the limitations that LLMs have, that they're not predictable, like there's all these problems with them, especially as they pertain to real world production applications. We address. We can now plug and play to any stack or pipeline that can consume LLMs. So it's like a very plug and play approach that we can connect our respective products to. So without a lot of lift, you can get like the benefits and innovations of both, which I think is pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, and at one point I just wanted to add on to like maybe I think make the picture super clear. Like we are not an application layer. We sit pretty low level. It's basically a C++ based graph. Of course, you can interact with it via Node or Unreal, but people like NLX are who we partner with. I think there's a slightly different user group that we're serving, and so I think it's very complementary. Like my hope is just that as we continue to build up capabilities, and there's like, okay, there's a cool little piece I'm going to pull in, and NLX can hopefully benefit from that. But our goal is to basically empower people like Andrei, not to necessarily go after the end users who are using the application. So I think it's very clear that there's an infrastructure versus application division there, which is why I think it's a great partnership.
That makes sense.
And just to kind of add to that, like realistically, you need the text to speech, you need the speech to text, you need different things connected, you need the LLM, blah, blah, blah. But since that stack is fairly consistent, if you don't have to bother engineering every little bit of that so that it's performant, then yeah, thank you. Please release more features, more capabilities,
Interesting. Yeah, that's really good. All right, so I want to get into definitely some of the benefits that we may experience over and above price. I do think price obviously is hugely important,
Yes.
But there's a lot more to it than that. Before we do that, I think it's worth having a listen. Should we have a listen at some of the in-world voice capabilities?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right, fair enough. Right, give me 1 sec then.
Mildly scary, but
Mildly scary. Live demos, they don't always go down very well. I don't know whose voice this is, but it's one of the voices. So let's have a little listen, see what it sounds like. I'll share the website so people can see. Inworld.ai. All right, here we go. Let's have a listen.
Hello, VUX world. This is what next-gen text-to-speech sounds like.
Oh, okay. Very good. I like the way that it went up in its inflection. This is what next-gen text-to-speech sounds like. That was quite cool.
that was a good one actually for like a support use case. That's definitely there's a variety. You'll figure it out. You can play with a few voices, but that was actually a good one you happened upon for a support use case.
Yeah. Let's have a listen to Ashley this time, shall we? All right, Ashley, here we go.
Hello, VUX world. This is what next-gen text-to-speech sounds like.
Okay. That's a bit more like impactful, dramatic, maybe talking about like a product pain point that we've got experiencing going on. Let's try one more. Let's try any recommendations for who we should try? Craig, Deborah, Dennis, Edward.
Hades.
Right.
That's what I would recommend you pick.
Yeah, Hades. All right, here we go then. Let's try this.
Hello, VUX world. This is what next-gen text-to-speech sounds like.
Yeah, that's movie trailer.
Rock band.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is really good. That's cool. That's really cool. I mean, one of the challenges that maybe it's. I mean, we'll get into. I'm sure we'll get a lot deeper than this. But one of the challenges that I've found recently is that it used to be with the old school text to speech and with everything being handcrafted in terms of the dialogue, that it wasn't perfect, but SSML at least did allow you to do certain things like slow it down, speed it up, pronounce things in a certain specific way. I remember we did some work years ago with Dove. I don't know if you have Dove in the US, Unilever. It's like a
of course.
brand. Yeah. And Alexa would always pronounce it Dove all the time. So SSML was great because you could just make sure it pronounced it Dove or Dove if you want to talk proper English. But with LLMs, because the content is being generated and it's different every time, sometimes you don't have that level of kind of like really close control, which one, is that feasible? And two, that must add a bit of pressure on both you, Andrei, from an experience design perspective, and also you, Kylan, from a creation point of view, because you want to make sure that what's generated sounds great. So I wonder whether you've got any thoughts on that.
I can speak through the NLX lens. We've supported SSML for quite some time, and effectively within the experience, whether you're using generative capabilities or not, you have the ability to interpolate SSML. Now, historically, generative text-to-speech hasn't been, hasn't really like opened up some of the SSML capabilities just because of the way I guess it's generated versus the more, I guess, the previous generation, let's just call it. Though I don't want to speak for Kylan, but what we've noticed for InWorld, like there's a number of markers and things that you can incorporate to actually allow you to control a number of elements. I know there's more and more capabilities coming to it too. So that's like from where we sit and where our customers sit, like fairly differentiating. We're actually going to use the Hades voice for marketing campaign. I won't disclose what we're with it because while we're not doing it for this immediate thing, we are still planning to maybe do something like that. Maybe closer to Halloween, who knows? But what was really cool is we could get all kinds of like coughing inflections and sort of like laughter and things like this that otherwise you can't really do with a lot of the other text-to-speech providers that, you know, from a UX standpoint, depending on what the use case is, can be rather impactful. Like even in a production, like let's say support use case, being able to like, while you're maybe waiting for a longer system call, let's say, to change an order as an example, takes 4 or 5 seconds, right? You don't want 4 or 5 seconds of silence, but maybe in the process, you're like, hey, you know, give me a second, I'm looking into it. And then maybe you cough, right? Or like just take a sigh or something like that. And it's that level of configurability is not only integrated from an NLX standpoint, but also like welcome from a experience design.
Yeah, and I think where we kind of sit in it is our goal is to make sure that we provide all the different controls at both the model level and at the orchestration level to basically do whatever you want. So what you're saying, Kane, is, you know, we lost a bit of control really when we went from the old school conversational AI, which was largely tree based and had a lot of these controls in it, to a text to speech where you're like, I just hope this thing does what I want. And so what we've been thinking through is both on the input and output side, how do we kind of in that level of control? So on the output side, which is the easy one to start with, so you, for example, use these nonverbal tags. So these are, for example, like coughing, laughing, blank, blank, where you literally insert it, you know, in square brackets in the text. And you could also get your LLM to generate that once you teach it how to, you know, we give you prompt it to do it properly, and it will generate those. And that kind of has an inflection. The other thing that you can do is you can actually add an emotion tag. So you can say, okay, you know, because we've had a customer, for example, who's in the medical space, and you're delivering very sad news, and you know, it would be very, 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 very bad if I was delivering sad news to you, and all of a sudden I became very happy. And so you want to have that. That's a catastrophic failure actually as a product. And so you want to make sure that you have that control over the emotion. So you basically add in, okay, you know, there's a very soft, you know, slight tag, and then maybe there's a sad tag after that to make sure that you have that natural expression in that moment. And then there's a bunch of other things. Like, for example, even right now we're working on like word level timestamps so that people, for example, who are doing, whether it's, you know, lip sync down the road or some kind of other processing, have that level of understanding and control. And so you're just stacking up additional outputs from the model that give you, or basically can have that control. And then I guess that's just kind of on the output side. On the input side as well, we of course have those tags. And also we're thinking about how do you add in other parts of the expression. So how can I take into account when I say or ah, it probably means I'm confused. So maybe I need to slow down a little bit on the other side. And so that's, I think, where this is all going is just continuing to expand the number of things that a developer or a user can have as inputs and the model can actually respond to. But where we were in the midterm, I think, is we just had these models that everybody's like, I just hope it really works. And now, especially when we're dealing with enterprises who are very sensitive, or but medical context or customer support context, you need that control. And so I think that's just where all the features are going now, because we've hit the cost, we've hit the quality. Now we need to give the control. That's, I think, where it's really going. And that also makes it accessible to a lot of different use cases that can't possibly just hope that TTS will do what it wants.
Yeah, because I think that there's a lot of really great lessons that were learned from like 2014 to 2020 maybe, when Alexa and Google Assistant were becoming really prominent and stuff like that. Because it was the first time that voice AI in that primitive state was, you know, it was in every house pretty much, and all of a sudden it's being used, like, you know, all the time. And so a couple of the things that were sort of established as good practice back then was things like, you know, it sounds a bit like a generalism, but it held to be true, which is that older people above a certain age benefit from having the voice slowed down. And to us three on this call, you know, it might sound very annoying, But to somebody who's a little bit hard of hearing and stuff like that, it's actually really valuable. Things like, let's say, for example, that I want to spell out a reference number, and you wanted to use an explicit confirmation to make sure that before I go and do anything with this data, I want to make sure I've got the right number. And you want to then explain that number back to make sure that it's understood properly. Those are the areas where SSML was quite useful, because you say, right, 1, half-second pause, 2, and again, it sounds a little bit unnatural sometimes, but it sort of works in terms of its effectiveness. I think those are the areas where, and it's like everything, really. What you used to have with control in terms of writing every single line, on the one hand was good because you can guarantee what's said, but on the other hand, it was terrible because you can never write the kind of responses that you need to for every situation. But then with LLMs, you get complete flexibility and creativity in response generation, but you lose a little bit of control over it. I feel as though we might be in the same kind of thing with the text-to-speech, because what you gain is tremendous. The inflection, the intonation, all of that kind of like stuff that you could never get with the old, even the neural net kind of text-to-speech voices. You just couldn't get that level of fidelity from it. Whereas you might lack, unless we can figure out a way of having a little bit more of a, as you were talking about, you might lose a little bit of fine-grained control. I don't know how critical that is. I don't know if you have any thoughts on.
Yeah, so there's one way to think about this, was just, you think about a 2x2, right? So you basically, on one axis, you can think about like containment or coverage of the use case. On the other side, you can basically like, it's assurance of quality. And where we were at before is your relative like coverage might have been very low, but your assurance of quality for that specific use case or pipeline was super high. But for example, like I saw, like Google and Dialogflow and these kinds of things, the challenge was always like, okay, well, there's always going to be this, 50% of use cases or users who are coming in who are not fitting within that. And so with the purely generative approach, we basically exploded that containment area where now it can engage with anyone, but your assurance of quality for each of those different types of user groups went down. And so now we're in that challenge of, okay, great, we can hit everyone, but how do we basically now build out the pipelines? And I think it's funny because we've been having a lot of conversations internally of like, crap, maybe we should have taken the lessons from Dialogflow and like these other platforms more seriously, because there's a lot of things that they actually did really right. But now we're in this other world where now we're able to serve every user, but also like have a lot more unreliability in there. And so now how do we start building in those same levels of control and assurance of quality into that larger containment rate? And once we do that, it basically means every user gets a user-specific quality that engages them, but it takes a lot of kind of how do we basically use AI even maybe to generate some of those controls that we had in the old world? How do we kind of expand it to new user groups? How do we generate new pipelines or parts of the tree when we kind of hit a non-contained area? And so I feel like we're kind of in some ways being like, okay, great, we've maxed out where we are just in terms of the purely generative part. Now it's a part for the engineering and the actual platform piece.
Mm-hmm.
That would be quite cool. Having the AI know how it should talk, basically, and have it then generate the things automatically. And you could even prompt some of that. I imagine you can probably prompt a lot of basic stuff today. Whenever you read a number back, slow it down or something like that, or whatever. But like, yeah, that'll be interesting. You could almost fine tune something on like, if you look at conversation analysis as a practice, and if you have a read of kind of like transcripts of conversations that have been labeled and marked down from a conversation analyst, they include all of that stuff in there, beats and inflection points and stuff like that. It's almost like you could maybe use some data like that just to sort of like, give it some sort of grounding in terms of how it should talk.
Well, but I feel in practice, most of the use cases that would get, let's say, deployed at scale would have a sense of brand voice, right? Like, let's say if you're talking to a credit card company, I mean, you kind of know what your brand voice should be: professional, clear, not rushed, not overly chip, none of that stuff, right? That's it. So like, you can provide those inputs, which I'm guessing you can definitely exercise more control, because ultimately in that pipeline you can then ensure, right, the outcome. to a decent degree. And then the other part of it is now with some of there's a bunch of like great companies that from an ASR standpoint expose more than just like here's the transcript, right? Like they get emotions, like shout out to another Comcast fellow company, but like Hume AI, right? Like they have some really cool capabilities there to detect emotions and whatnot. So like you know, those can become inputs. So even in the case of the credit card company, if you see the person gets aggravated, then you can choose to, hey, if the person exhibits any of these emotions, here's how I want you to do. And those can be like just deterministic rules that you should apply, because like it doesn't have to be guesswork. If you're in a game, I could see how, you know what, world's your oyster, trigger whatever. But I feel there's a lot of practical things, going back to what you mentioned, Kylan, about the things from dialogue flow and whatnot. It's like, well, yeah, like sometimes determinism is your best friend, and it doesn't mean it pushes out the other fun and super cutting edge stuff, but it just makes things practical.
And I want to like one thing that we're kind of looping to here is a problem that we see, and I think one of what sits behind a lot of this is how are you evaluating the quality? Like how are you evaluating the things that you care about as a customer? So if you're talking about a credit card company, you know, your containment rate, your fulfillment of a specific use case, the assurance that you're not sitting outside of brand guidelines, the assurance, let's say, like basic things. Are you mentioning competitors? Those can all be measured as metrics. And so one of the challenges that we see is we've gotten really good at evaluating text-to-text pipelines because they're, you know, it's basically text. I can say, is it within this domain? When you start having a voice-to-voice pipeline, okay, did I properly recognize that emotion? Did I do this? And it's very complicated. But at the end of the day, you can see those hard metrics that the developer or the user care about. Okay, is this fulfilling the problem? Is it containing the problem? Or is it having to go to a human? You know, is it basically running efficiently? You know, you can look at the cost, latency. So there's a bunch of very hard metrics that can tell you, was this a successful outcome? And as long as we have that, then we can make sure that it's basically fulfilling all of it. And I say it because it's a remaining problem, especially for voice-based pipelines. I don't think there's great solutions there yet in terms of how to actually evaluate the quality of an end-to-end interaction. You can say at the specific model level, but the end-to-end interaction is really hard to say whether it's good or not, unless you, of course, get the user to go do a survey app and say, yeah, great, thumbs up.
That's right. Yeah, wherever obviously human input can be provided, it's very valuable because you can trust it. Someone told me, this is fantastic. Great, it was fantastic. But then I guess the opportunity is then to get that voluntary labeling from the end users in the wild and use it as a measure of, okay, this is fantastic. Why are there patterns that make this fantastic versus not? And it's interesting, right? Because the complexity of the real world and use cases is such that let's just take an airline example. You might have two individuals who both go through the process of canceling a flight, as an example. One of them gives a very high rating, the other one doesn't. But let's say, objectively speaking, they've gone through the same process, but the one that provided the lower rating might be frustrated with the airline policy, or because, you know, whatever happens to their flight, and provide you know, feedback that unfortunately doesn't help. And even in the context of automation, right? Like sometimes you know the automation rates feasible for one use case within a company and another use case within the exact same company have a drastically different potential just because of that very human element, you know, dissatisfaction with things outside of the system's control. And yeah, it's indeed, I guess, a rather challenging thing. But even there, I feel being able to rely on maybe the brands to stipulate what quality or lack of quality would be can likely help a lot versus just allowing the system to infer that on its own.
I think a lot of it's quite subjective, though, isn't it, when it comes to voice? Because, like, you know when something doesn't sound right. I think that's probably fair enough. I think that, like, if you were to line up 100 people, play them a voice recording of, something that doesn't quite sound right, they'll probably pick up on it. How you would measure that from a systems point of view is quite challenging. But I think that what we're discussing here is, like, as people who've been working in that space for a long time, this is like the quest for perfection, isn't it? This is like, you're knee deep in this, and you know that there's gaps that you could fill. But the reality is, take a step back and just look at the quality of the voices that we've just played just then. They're absolutely amazing. When you look back and you go back and you rewind to 2017 and you listen to Alexa and Google Assistant, they're absolutely phenomenal. Like, you can accomplish so much just with I say just with, it's not just with, you can accomplish so much with the voices that we have. And there's a bit of a quest for perfection. And of course, yeah, the small details might matter, but I think that, we shouldn't kind of like, I don't know. I think we should also appreciate how great the voices are even now,
Well, and I just want to piggyback off that, because what's been really crazy is I'd even say not only to 2017, but even 2 years ago. So I think there was a point a couple of years ago where everybody was like, text-to-text pipelines, but it was what everybody was using. And I'd say genuinely in the last year to even 6 months, we finally got to that point with speech-to-text quality. We finally got good, automatic like VAD and speaker detection. We just started stacking up those little wins where all of a sudden you can see that the annual growth rate in the last year for voice specifically has exploded. And I think there's also this consumer behavior change where people are getting used to talking to their phone. They're getting used to hearing things back in audio. And I genuinely, I feel not like that this shift that you're pointing at is realized in how we're seeing user behavior change. And that means that companies need to build into that too. And so it's genuinely like we're finally at that point where the cost, the quality, the controls are there, and it is. I think it's like genuinely like voice is, and basically text chat of course works as well. But I think we're at that point now where audio in, audio out works, and I genuinely think that's a very, very new thing.
I mean, if you think, Andrei, if you go back to 2017, 2018, 2019, when you're working on a lot of voice projects with customers and stuff like that, do you remember there was a big kind of like movement with some companies about wanting to have their own branded voice? Remember?
Yes.
And at the time, it was like you had to go to Microsoft for it, you had to go to like Google for it, you had to go to Amazon for it, and they were charging like $100,000
prohibitively.
to have you create your own voice, which is crazy. And now you look at InWorld and many others where they're just, the list of voices is endless. You can clone your voice in like 30 seconds worth of audio, probably more than that if you want to do it in a high fidelity, high quality, but still you can get somewhere really, really easily. So I wonder whether, like, was that a fad back then of we want our own specific unique brand voice? Because now you've got so many voices to choose from. It feels as though, I don't know, is it a waste of time to create your own specific brand voice now, or are you still observing that that's wanted?
I'll answer through my lens, and I'm curious, what Kylan's answer will be here. But I think back then it used to be more like any brand's pursuit of that was a lot more tied to their attempt at getting a higher quality voice, like thinking like, oh, if I clone Kane's voice, all of a sudden, like this voice will be better. But it was still operating through the same technology stack. So like, if it felt robotic or whatnot, like, it wasn't due to like the voice actor that generated the original voice, right? And as time's gone by, and obviously the state of the art is in a drastically different place there, customers just, like, we have some of the customers who obviously use InWorld for the text-to-speech capabilities, and they'll just go and be like, I want this one. It's like, great, go and select it, and that's it. So I think customers have developed a sense of I guess the voices are or the technology is so accessible nowadays that even folks who are non-technical can self-service on the technology, which is fantastic because then it opens up a world of opportunity. And to just kind of touch on both of your points around how, you have this accessibility component, right? And like people are just more used to like talking to their phones and responding because, for most people, it's the most natural form of communication. That's the premise of why NLX exists in this case. It's like we recognize that conversational applications are the natural evolution of human-computer interaction, and making it accessible for anyone, not just the select few and engineers specifically, for anyone to go in and be able to bring their ideas to life with all the permutations and configurations that they so choose, will unlock this basically conversational future where you talk to literally everything. Alexa, and well, you could argue like Siri was one of the more, let's say, mainstream voice assistants, but they didn't quite figure out how to expand on that. We'll see how some of the latest capabilities might fan out. And then Alexa had like incredible distribution, yet, most people like turn on and off their lights and set timers, right? So like the limitations of understanding and the ability to just take action were a bottleneck for, the user experience. And as a result, people just use them for basic things. So now, because a lot of that has gone away and the state of the art of what you can do is so extensive. Like we live in very interesting times.
So my perspective on the voice thing is that I remember I was at Google when, for example, WaveNet, was starting to explode, and WaveNet really was one of the first models that really kind of allowed for this natural speech. And what I generally see is we've got to this point where, your brand voice is easy to create. So we have tons of customers, whether it's via zero-shot voice cloning, they upload 15 seconds of audio and get a voice, or they have a voice actor who they're like, I want it to be this person. I'm going to give you hours of audio and do professional voice cloning on it. You're going to get your voice. But what I would say is the general shift is it's from brand voice to brand personality. And what brand personality means is also, how does this thing tend to respond to things? Not necessarily just what is the little voice that it uses, but, for example, a medical agent is going to be very different from a customer support agent or a brand representative agent. Brand representative agent is going to get very excited about things. They're going to know all about the brand. They're going to not necessarily ask many questions about you. It's going to be telling things. For example, how is it pulling on certain types of knowledge? Like the capabilities are also part of the personality. So, if you have a brand representative, you're just going to expect it to answer questions. If you have a technical support agent, you're going to expect that to be able to do problems for you. And so it's really about taking not just the voice part of it, but the rest of the pipeline that builds all those capabilities, which is what NLX does. And so you're not just creating that voice, but that complete personality that is able to respond to you in the correct way in that moment. And I think a funny example that I recently came across of this personality thing is Google Maps versus Apple Maps. It's basically doing the same thing, but it actually has quite a different personality, specifically how it responds to little things. In that case, it's almost like the end-to-end pipeline is probably very similar, but it has a slightly different personality. And I recently saw a presentation from the Google Gemini team where they said, users' preference for personality was actually one of the most highly correlated things that they found with user experience. So basically, did people like the actual personality of Gemini when they were interacting with it? And we see the same thing with ChatGPT, of course. People got freaked out around the ChatGPT 5 launch because the personality changed. And so I think there's a lesson there to say, which is like what users care about more than anything else is, do they relate and do they connect with the personality? And also that the preferred personality is different depending on the use case and sector. And that is, I think, a very interesting domain that will kind of shape the future of like how we even think about voice interfaces.
Maybe even it's also, if you were to keep going down that thread, I remember in 2018 or 2019, there's a guy called Brian Romilly who was kind of like, I suppose at the time, like a self-professed voice AI expert. But to be fair, he was incredibly knowledgeable, very clever person, built a load of stuff in his garage on like Raspberry Pis, and like he had voice assistants running before Alexa was out and all this kind of stuff. Really, really smart guy. And one of the things that he mentioned as some kind of like aspirational future reality was that your own personal voice assistant, which we're getting round to that now. I think people, now they've seen ChatGPT, they can understand that, oh, I might probably have my own personal assistant now. Whereas in 2018, when you saw Alexa, people weren't really thinking that they'll have their own Alexa. Whereas, Brian was on a lot about your own personal voice assistant will basically be a reflection of your own personality in terms of the way that it behaves, which gets to exactly what you were saying there, Kylan. It's like the way that you perceive something. And like, the fundamental of conversations is, one of the definitions of conversation is a shared quest for understanding. And part of understanding is not just doing what you've said. It's in those little tiny things that show that you're listening. So when you mirror back what somebody said to confirm you've understood them or whatever it might be. And so large language models have given us the ability to demonstrate understanding in unparalleled ways because they sound really natural. Now the voice capabilities alongside it are sounding even better, which I also think might encourage the forgiveness of a poor experience in part. Because if you get something wrong, if you sound nice and there's a relationship being built, the user's probably going to forgive you a little bit more. But then if you take that further, you start to get into the realms of what Brian was talking about, which is that your personal assistant will mirror your personality. So, for example, let's say that I'm the kind of person who's very direct and I don't want any rubbish or any fluff and I just want you to get to the point. If I need to be redirected in traffic on my way to work, I don't need to know where it is and what's happened and if everyone's all right and where we're going to go instead. And I just want to know, tell me where we're going to go, just redirect me. Whereas somebody else with a different personality type might want to know a little bit more detail. We're going to go this way for this reason and it's going to take this much longer, and or give you a choice, like you want to go this way or that way. And so it's kind of like mirroring your personality type based on the Myers-Briggs personality is quite interesting. Which is kind of, I suppose, related in part to some of the developments that we saw earlier in the year from Sesame. I don't know if you saw that, which the idea was that it will understand your tonality and your inflection, and it will almost mirror back to you your tone. It feels as though those type of things, personality, understanding, which is related to what you were saying, and perhaps some degree of mirroring tonality or what have you. I don't know, is that the next step, or is that not as needed because what we have now is good enough?
I think, to me, the answer is kind of simple. Like, basically, where we started with is just getting components to a certain quality level. We have good text to speech, we got good speech to text, whatever. Next level is, can we build these pipelines that work generally well for most people? And I think what you're getting into, which is what I see as the third level, which is where we're focused now, which is personalization. So now you have that pipeline. How do each parts of that slightly tweak? And this is actually one of the things that we've been focused on, is how can you serve, for example, 100 variants for 100 different user segments and make sure that each of them is slightly different and improved. So, you may, for example, prefer a much faster response. You may also prefer in a certain context to not actually have it refer to your memories. One company that I think has done this really well already on the personalization front is Duolingo. Duolingo has an entire team, and I had to be with the chief engineering officer earlier this week on a panel, and they have done a ton of work to say, okay, you tend to basically like to respond in these certain ways. Your language level is this low. This is how I'm going to personalize. And so much of what they do is taking the same very, very simple pipeline and making small tweaks to it so that it's different for you. And even how it uses memory is part of that. Like, does it verbatim repeat back the things that you just said to it? Or does it just like slightly bring them up in the future if you bring up that topic? There's so much that goes into that, like that personal expression of personality. And I pointed to Duolingo as like kudos, because I think they did that very well. But I think there's a lot more to be done by others as well.
From the application layer perspective, it's effectively a dissemination or just kind of distribution of these settings to all the different components that make up the overall stack, and then they all support the different level of personalization. Like if you support if you're integrated with a voice that supports different elements of personalization, whether it's like brevity and tonality, etc., then you can pass those along. The level of personalization also applies to the ASR, the speech to text as well, right? If it supports, like, some people who are non-native speakers might say things in a certain way, and then being able to pass in information around, like, hey, you might want to tailor the transcription or the understanding of this particular user through this lens because of the following attributes. So from the application layer standpoint, we see this and do this in a way where we orchestrate across all these different components and then like pass in the information as well as like collect it back to continuously improve, right? Because like the first interaction with the user, you will have to sort of engage in some sort of like defaults, and as you learn more about them, especially if it's a use case where there are repeated interactions, then you keep picking up on different nuances that then inform the experience in the long term.
I mean, that makes perfect sense from the sort of like, from the tech provision standpoint. You need to be in a place where you can offer everything that might be needed and it is needed. Do you see that kind of like clients are desiring this in terms of like ultra personalization, or is that something that, are we like talking about something that we're a little bit ahead of the curve on? Is that something that's going to come later?
Yeah, so generally the way that we're seeing personalization is like in two different steps. So first is at the segment level, and then second is at the user specific level. So segment level is as you're scaling to new user groups. So this is new geographies, new demographics. So you get it working really well for 20 to 30-year-olds on the West Coast, California, Washington, Oregon. That's your, you basically optimize it for that. It's performing super well and retaining. Then you expand to Europe. Now you're adding on new languages, you're adding on demographics, perhaps different ages tend to engage with it. So you're kind of figuring out how does the pipeline adapt them. As you brought up earlier, for example, you have an older audience who's maybe hard of hearing. Okay, now all of a sudden it tends to be the application is being used by an older audience in the UK. So how do we make sure that it's working for them? And then I think the next step is at the user specific level. So once you've got, okay, all of my different segments that I serve have the same retention, quality scores, everything else, I'm happy. Now I'm going to move on to saying, okay, what are the slight tweaks I can make for this user specifically? So, there's going to be very, very differences within, for example, 20 to 30-year-old males in California still. And so you start to get at that level of going from segment specific personalization to user specific personalization. I think we're at the segment level still, which is really just creating variants of these pipelines that are unique to them. But I think that's where it will naturally go, is getting more and more specific. And then even to beyond the person, time of day, state of mind, all those different things that actually could even get into, okay, you might want to interact differently in the morning than at 11 p.m. at night. And so how do I make sure that I'm responding to all of that? And so those all become things that at some point we're just going to do some real-time personalization to figure out who are you, what context are you in, what state of mind are you in, how do you interact, and basically push it that way.
Wow. Any thoughts on that, Andrei?
Yeah, I mean, I'd separate or split enterprise from just kind of general population for this. I'd say for consumer products, it's definitely spot on, based on what Kylan said. For enterprise, like the problems that they have that still need to be solved are so far removed from even just the conversational piece, AI, whatever comes into it. Like they might not have APIs for personalization, like, because it's not just about like that data has to live somewhere and it has to have a strategy around it. And oftentimes it's not even on the table. Now, at the enterprise level, at the very least, most brands are interested in quality of the voice. They'll have some brand voice, but when I say brand voice, I don't mean voice. I mean just speaking through the lens of like how the copy, exactly, the personality, the copy that sort of comes back, and that's generally prescriptive. And the level of personalization there, like, is fairly limited to name recall and if they have the data, be like, oh, okay, and I see you're calling about this particular thing that you just did on the website or mobile app. Is that it? And then you kind of move on from there. But I feel as the different like enterprise stacks get modernized, and I could see an inflection in the not so distant future where this becomes the next big thing. And if it does, it will push a lot of these organizations to be like, we need to get there. But the exciting thing is a lot of the technologies that need to come together to make this a reality are already here, and they're only getting better. So it's super exciting to operate in this space in the middle of all this innovation.
Nice. Wicked. Well, anything we've missed in this discussion? It's been incredibly interesting from my side. I think hearing, one in terms of the kind of like partnership and what you guys are doing. I think from NLX's standpoint is obviously very sensible, trying to bring lifelike voices. And I think, Kylan, what you were saying there in terms of the research suggesting that the personality and the perception of the thing increases satisfaction dramatically, I think is a huge lesson that people can adhere to. Definitely, the sound of the voices are great, and I think it's amazing how far they've come, especially from like the Alexa and Google days, and so what you have there is absolutely fantastic. I think you're right, Andrei. The technology is there now for businesses to do some really, really compelling things on the voice channel, combining the power of understanding from large language models with the really rich kind of, studio quality, almost really human-like voices is absolutely tremendous. I don't know if you guys have any sort of like any closing words, any things that we've missed, any kind of pieces for advice for people who are trying to get this off the ground, anything that you'd close with?
I think my only closing remark would be I think people need to experiment more. So generally what I find is people build a pipeline or something they're happy with, and they say, okay, it works generally well for users, but there's so much room for improvement. And so what I mean by that is it's very hard to guess what will most engage a user out of the gate. And so whatever you build first is probably not optimal. And so trying to figure out, okay, what are the things that you really care about? And what are the little knobs that you can tweak here and there? Because it might just be as simple as, okay, I need to speak a little bit slower. Or it might be as complex as, okay, this user's dropping off because I repeated this same question because I didn't have memory. And so a lot of that is just saying, can you constantly be able to experiment on your pipeline to make sure that it's optimizing for your quality rather than kind of letting it sit and just waiting for the next model to come out before you do an update. Just to say that there is so much room for improvement and learning in that experimentation. And I just see a lot of folks still, being slow on that. And so the one prompt is to say, to do what's best for your users, I think that you need to be able to constantly experiment on different variants. And you'll probably be surprised that you can get, 10 to 50% improvements in engagement through very small tweaks. And so my only closing remark is just like, let's play around with it more. And I think we're going to learn a lot by doing that.
Nice.
Well, on that note, you can use NLX and Inworld to make that experimentation a reality. I'll just leave it to that.
Perfect.
Nice.
There you go.
Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Wicked. Well, if you did want to do that, then you can go to, NLX.ai and Inworld.ai. I'm assuming, actually, Andrei, through NLX.ai, you have obviously everything plugged into Inworld, so you can get in there, you can build, you can prototype, you can get on with it, and you can do it that way, yeah?
Yeah. Start building.
Let's start building. Fantastic. All right, that's great. Andrei, always a pleasure to speak to you, my friend. Look out, because there's a cap on its way for the hat trick. Kylan, thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate it. Love the story. Love what you're doing. 2 more times for you before you get the VUX hat trick.
Yeah,
so let's
I'm
pencil
excited
in the
for
next
my
one.
hat when it comes in.
Nice one. All right, thank you guys very much. Thank you all for tuning in,
so much.
and we'll see you again on the next one. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you soon.